What's up everyone? Welcome to my channel. My name is Chris. I'm a self-employed arborist and natural bodybuilder, and this is going to be the start of a new series where I answer your questions about my experiences and information I have learned and gathered in the arboriculture industry. Haven't come up with the title yet, but gonna figure that out. This was inspired by a subscriber who had a lot of good questions, and I figured, well, you know what, I can do more in-depth responses in a video and reach more people and maybe help some people out. Now, I want to emphasize, I do things the way I do things. I'm not saying it's right. I do consider myself a very safety-oriented climber and tree worker, but you got to take responsibility for your own safety and well-being. With that being said, before we go any further, I just want to say I'm passionate about many different things. I talk about fitness on this channel. I talk about tree work. I talk about entrepreneurship. I talk about bodybuilding, different things. So if you're here for any specific topic, don't worry. I'm making sure to devote enough time to cover all the things that I do put out there. So whether you're here for fitness content, tree work content, or a little bit of everything, don't worry, I got you covered. So in today's premiere episode of this new series, I'm going to talk about how I got started climbing and how I got started in the tree care industry. So growing up as a kid, I always enjoyed climbing trees. I used to go up there and read for hours. I mean, countless nights I spent up in the tree just reading books. I even had one brilliant idea once to spend the whole night up in a tree, but I ended up not doing that. And so I always had a thing for climbing trees. I started becoming more interested in tree work, and I finally one day had the idea to, well, you know what? Why don't I buy some basic climbing gear and learn how to climb? So I bought just some basic stuff off Amazon and just kept practicing in my backyard. Started off small, gradually, went up to bigger things, climbing to the very tippy tops of the tree. And I just practiced and practiced and practiced for well over a year. Just different techniques in my backyard, climbed all the trees around the property, and just trying out different things. I'd come home from work, I'd go climbing, and I just kept at it. Watched a lot of YouTube videos of, good climbers and arborists, absorbing different information. Also invest in some books. This is The Climber's Companion, and this is Knots at Work. I recommend checking these books out. I got them on treestuff.com. A lot of good information in these books. So I just kept doing that, practicing climbing. And then I started doing, a little bit of tree work here and there. For people I knew, neighbors, nothing real major, maybe just a little bit of pruning or something. Prior to becoming a legitimate climber, I had done miscellaneous tree work for people, but once I actually learned how to properly climb and have my own gear, then I started branching out a little bit. And I think I jumped the gun at some point because I decided, right, so I had a job and doing towing and recovery, and then I decided, well, I want to start a tree service business without fully understanding what it means to start a business. And this was, after climbing for a little bit at my house. And I remember creating a company name, putting advertising out there, and I got a call for a tree job. And I went and looked at the tree job. And it was rigging a limb over a house. Now, doing that now, it would have been a cakewalk.
Lower it down a little bit. Easy.
But back then, I was just starting out. I really had no business looking at jobs. For one thing, I wasn't going about it the right way, starting a legitimate small business. And I got there the day of, and I couldn't do the job. Got up the tree and I just, froze. Came down and said, well, you know what, I need spikes. So I'll get spikes and then I'll come back. Now granted, you don't really use spikes on a prune. So tried it a second time, couldn't do it. I don't know if I just got freaked out. Oh, I was like, okay, all right. So stopped with that and just kept climbing, just kept practicing. Eventually, I decided to leave my towing and recovery job, and I was actually looking at getting a job with the tree service. Tried out with them for a few days, and when I didn't hear back right away, I ended up deciding to start my own business again. Now, this is after having gained more experience of climbing since that initial experience where I bid that job, but then I couldn't do it because I got freaked out. So but this time around, I actually learned about starting a legitimate business, insurances, everything like that. So I started off small, doing a job here and there, or trying to get a job here and there. And then I really kind of pulled the trigger on starting a legitimate business. And every year has just been growth and progress, not just business-wise, but also my ability as a climber, a tree worker. Doesn't matter whether you got 5 years of climbing experience or you got 30 years of climbing experience, there is always things to learn, and mistakes can happen no matter how experienced you are. All it takes is a second of complacency or, getting too cocky. That's essentially how I got started with climbing as a self-taught climber, and doing tree work for people I know or helping people I know doing tree work. That kind of sparked an interest in professional tree work, I guess you could say. And the funny thing is I never wanted to use a gas chainsaw because somebody had told me a horror story when I was younger about how he knew somebody, the chainsaw kicked back and ripped open his chest, and I was like, I ain't using a chainsaw ever. I mean, I've cut up whole trees with a freaking axe and handsaw because I was afraid to use a chainsaw. Go figure. Now I climb with, 24-inch chainsaw, different kinds of chainsaws. I make my living using a chainsaw, right? Key is getting comfortable, learning how to operate the saw. So that's kind of how I got started in the climbing, with the climbing part of things. And I'm still learning. Even though I have more experience, like I said, you're always learning. So I want to talk briefly about the tree care industry portion of this. So I started my business, and at this point, I started a legitimate business a couple years ago. And at this point, I had more climbing experience, but I still sometimes got myself into situations that I wasn't ready for. Bidding jobs that were clearly beyond my capabilities, and then, finding out I can't do it. And when I look back on some of those jobs and I look on some of those experiences, I don't think it's so much a lack of skill or a lack of knowledge as to how to do the job as much as it's psychological. I would sometimes get freaked out when I get into bigger trees. I don't know what it is. Some climbers, you'll have that where you move around fine in a smaller tree, but once you get up to height or you get into big wood, it just, I don't know, it can psychologically can appear different, even though some of your protocols, your safety protocols, how you climb, the same applications can apply to a bigger tree that you would apply to a smaller tree. I guess it's how your brain perceives risk. Bigger wood, higher off the ground, maybe, more risk. But the reality is whether you're 10 feet off the ground or 90 feet off the ground, there's risk. Accidents can happen. So since then, I have definitely learned more about being in tune with what my capabilities are. And not just skill-wise as a climber, but also psychologically. Because there's a psychological aspect to climbing. You're talking about putting your life at risk, every time you go up in the tree. It's a dangerous line of work, whether you're doing tree work or you're just climbing recreationally. So you gotta listen to your body, listen to your mind. If you're real nervous and you're just scared to be up in a tree, or you're hugging a tree because you're afraid to move around, maybe you need to back off a little bit and start smaller. So as a climber, know your limits and don't be afraid to say, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this, especially if you work for somebody, right? I went the self-taught route, and I went the route of starting my own business. And the reason why I did that is because I consider myself a very safety-oriented climber, and I know there's companies out there and there's people out there doing things that is unnecessarily risky, and I don't want to be involved with that. I like being in control and being able to take charge and say, hey, this is how we're doing things. And I have a very particular way of doing things as far as safety, but also my work in general. What we do for our customers. Know your limits and leave the ego at the door. There is no shame in saying, you know what, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And at the same time, I think there's a time and place to push through feeling uncomfortable, but there's also a time and place when you need to back off. By facing the uncomfortable, that's how you grow and become a better climber. But if it comes at the price that you're putting yourself and others at risk, that's not okay. So you kind of have to gauge, is this, maybe I'm feeling a little nervous and uncomfortable, but is it something I can safely work through? Or is this hindering my ability to safely perform my job? First time I rode a crane up to a 100-foot pine tree, I was a little nervous, dangling from the cable, because I'm used to hugging the tree, being near the tree, being tied into the tree, and now I'm just tied into this cable, with no tree to necessarily grab onto. So you really got to be in tune with yourself and know your limits. Now, obviously, my situation is a little bit different being self-employed, but for those of you out there who might just be starting out, or you're thinking about getting a job with a tree service, don't let anybody pressure you or rush you, if you're not feeling comfortable. You are in charge when you're in the tree. You have the last call. So if you know something is right, then you do what you know is right. Don't worry about the people on the ground. Don't let anybody else rush you, because they're getting impatient because you're setting your second tie-in or whatever. Don't cut corners for anybody else. It's your life that's on the line. And that brings me to another point, is if you are looking at getting a job with a tree service, or you're thinking about it, make sure you're getting a job with a reputable company, a safety-oriented company, one that, pays attention to safety standards, current industry practices, encourages safety, encourages learning and growth in your career as a tree worker. Because the thing is yeah, you can be safety oriented, but if you're surrounded by people who aren't, or people who are goofing off or whatever, it puts the whole team at risk. When you're on a tree job, especially when you're getting involved with big removals and stuff, everybody needs to be working together and needs to be on the same page. Because if one part of that whole oiled machine is off, it can throw the whole thing off, and it can put everybody's lives at risk. So you really want to find a team, a crew, a company that cares about safety. All right, so that's going to be it for the first episode of this series. Hope you guys enjoyed it and found it interesting. I'd love to hear your comments below. If you have any specific questions you'd like me to do a video response on, anything at all, I'm open to all your suggestions. I want to hear them. This series is going to be built around answering what you guys want to know from me as a self-employed arborist and tree climber. So, with that being said, I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe up in the trees. Thanks for watching.